I never expected to be laughed out of my own home at 16. The irony, of course, was that the laughter wasn't mine. They were applauding my twin, Ethan, for turning out better than me. According to Mom, that day, I discovered that blood ties didn't always mean equality, and pride could be more painful than heartbreak. I packed what little I had, shoved the anger down my throat, and walked away. The street outside was wet from a recent rain, reflecting neon signs in scattered puddles. My backpack felt heavier than usual, probably because it wasn't just carrying clothes. It held years of rejection and a silent vow that one day, everyone who doubted me would know my worth. I didn't cry, couldn't. Crying felt like surrendering to a family that had already decided who I was supposed to be. Ethan, of course, waved goodbye like I was some minor inconvenience, his perfect teeth shining in the dim streetlight. "Don't worry, little bro. You'll figure yourself out someday," he said. The mockery wasn't subtle, but I smiled anyway, hiding the furious fire burning inside me. That smile, brittle as glass, became my shield. New York was nothing like the small suburban town I left behind. Skyscrapers replaced picket fences, endless crowds replaced familiar neighbors, and the cold city wind replaced the warm, smothering embrace of my family's indifference. I took odd jobs at cafes and bookstores, learning the rhythm of survival and how to listen to the stories people didn't tell anyone else. It was during these small, invisible moments that I discovered power, not the kind that demanded attention, but the kind that quietly built itself under the radar, unnoticeable until it couldn't be ignored. I remember the first time I saw Julian. He was standing outside a boutique, leaning against the brick wall with a cigarette dangling lazily between his fingers. His hair was a mess, sun-kissed and falling over his forehead, eyes that seemed too intelligent for his carefree grin. Something about him made the world pause, and before I realized it, my chest was tightening for reasons I refused to name. Julian noticed me staring and smirked, a slow, teasing curl of his lips. "What? Never seen someone stare before?" His voice was playful, yet there was a hint of curiosity. Just wondering if you need a hand with the door," I muttered, more embarrassed than I cared to admit. He laughed, low and genuine, and in that laugh, I felt a dangerous pull, a mixture of amusement and challenge that I couldn't resist. "No thanks, but thanks for offering." His eyes lingered a moment too long before he walked inside. I stood there longer than I should have, heart thumping like a warning drum. Days turned into weeks, and I kept running into him, always by coincidence, yet never truly by chance. There was a rhythm to it, like the universe enjoyed teasing me. Each encounter left me more unsettled than the last, not with fear, but with longing I didn't understand. My heart, which I thought had hardened years ago, reminded me that life had a cruel way of making itself felt when I least expected it. I built my career from scratch. Nights spent in dimly lit offices, negotiating deals that no one thought I could close, learning to read people with surgical precision, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, becoming someone who commanded attention with a single word or glance. Every step I took, every small victory, was a silent message to the family that had written me off. I was no longer the boy they could ignore. Yet, despite the professional armor I had crafted, Julian remained my exception. He saw through the meticulous walls, through the tailored suits and polished smile, into the parts one had tried to bury. And I realized, perhaps for the first time, that letting someone see you wasn't weakness, it was courage. Our first real conversation wasn't about work or ambition or life plans. It was about a book we had both reached for at the same time in a tiny, crowded bookstore. I remembered the warmth of his hands brushing mine, the shock of electricity that shot through me as our fingers collided. I laughed, nervously, because it felt ridiculous, but he just smiled, those deep hazel eyes glinting with amusement. "You're competitive," he said. "I can't help it," I admitted. "I'm used to losing." His smirk softened into something more intimate, almost tender. "Not here," he said. "Not anymore." From that moment, things began to change. We started spending more time together, first under the guise of friendship, but quickly, the boundaries blurred. Lunches turned into dinners, conversations turned into late-night walks across city rooftops, our silhouettes cast against neon-lit streets like two actors in a play written just for us. The closeness was intoxicating, the kind that made the world outside fade, leaving only the thrum of our own hearts. But the past was never far behind. Every time my phone buzzed with a message from my family, I felt a mix of triumph and irritation. They had called, finally, using the title I had earned through years of blood, sweat, and countless sleepless nights, boss. I smirked at the formality, the distant respect finally offered too late. Ethan's name still lingered in my mind, a ghost of the boy I had once shared everything with before favoritism and family expectations tore us apart. Julian, though, anchored me. When I returned home for the first time in years, it wasn't for their approval, but to prove something to myself. And walking through the grand halls of the family mansion, with Julian's hand entwined in mine, I felt a strange sense of justice. We moved like shadows among portraits of ancestors, powerful yet unseen, bound by choice, not blood. You really did it? Julian whispered as we paused at the top of the main staircase, the city lights beyond the windows casting a soft glow over him. I did, I replied, voice steady but my chest still tight. And this time, I'm not leaving anything behind. He leaned closer, resting his forehead against mine. Then don't, he murmured, and the world narrowed down to just that, our breaths, our shared warmth, the undeniable gravity pulling us together. Even amidst triumph, there was vulnerability. Ethan, the twin who had once eclipsed me in our parents' eyes, now stood at a crossroads too. I wasn't sure if reconciliation was possible, but I knew that the power I held wasn't just in money or influence, it was in choosing who to let into my life, and more importantly, in choosing to love without apology. The city stretched endlessly below us, a canvas of dreams and regrets, neon and shadow. And as Julian's fingers laced with mine, I realized that home wasn't a place defined by family, but by the people who saw you, truly saw you, and stayed. The night was ours, as much as the years had been stolen. And for the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to breathe, to laugh, and to imagine a life where love wasn't a punishment or a contest, but the most exhilarating victory of all. Returning from that first triumphant visit home, I thought I would feel lighter, liberated, like a weight had finally been lifted off my shoulders. Instead, I was greeted by the familiar hum of the city, the endless chatter of ambition, and the constant tug of my own expectations. Success had a price, I realized, it a constant balancing act between who I was, who I wanted to be, and who the world expected me to be. Julian, as always, was the gravity that kept me grounded. We walked the crowded streets of Manhattan, hands intertwined, our silence comfortable yet brimming with unspoken words. Every glance he gave me carried reassurance, a promise that even when the world threatened to crumble, we had each other. You ever get tired of being boss? He asked one evening, leaning against the railing of my apartment balcony, city lights stretching like rivers of fire below us. I let out a short laugh, though it carried no humor. Sometimes, I admitted, it's a title that people use to measure me, but it doesn't define me. Not really. He tilted his head, eyes scanning my face like he was reading a book only he could understand. And does it feel good when they finally acknowledge it? Yes, I said quietly, because it did, but it also felt empty without someone to share it with. The victories, the late nights, the silent moments when the world was asleep and we could just exist. Julian filled that void, not with grand gestures, but with presence. Our connection deepened quickly. Evenings that began with casual drinks became nights spent wandering the quiet streets of Brooklyn, hands brushing, shoulders touching, and laughter spilling into the night air. The city had a way of amplifying our intimacy, its neon glow highlighting the curve of his jaw, the tilt of his head when he smiled at me, the subtle brush of fingers that sent shivers down my spine. But life, as it often does, introduced complications. Ethan reached out unexpectedly. His message was formal, cautious, as if he wasn't sure how to address the twin he had dismissed so easily. We need to talk. Can you meet me? I stared at the screen, my mind racing through 1,000 possible reactions: anger, curiosity, Indifference, but before I could respond, Julian leaned over my shoulder. His fingers brushed mine instinctively. "Do you want to see him?" he asked softly. I hesitated. Ethan represented the past I had tried to leave behind, the family that had undervalued me, the shadow of comparison I had escaped years ago. And yet, curiosity pried at me. I had come too far to be defined by old wounds, but part of me wanted closure, or at least to see if he had changed. I do," I said finally. The meeting was set in a quiet cafe uptown. I arrived early, my suit sharp, hair perfectly combed, exuding the image of the man who had clawed his way out of neglect. Julian stayed outside, giving me space but remaining nearby a comforting presence even from a distance. When Ethan walked in, he looked older, more polished, but his eyes still held the familiar arrogance that had haunted my youth. He froze when he saw me, recognition sparking something complicated in his gaze. "Hello," he said, voice measured. "You've done well." I smiled faintly, an expression I had perfected over years of practice. "Thanks. You too." We talked cautiously at first, skirting around the old wounds, each word weighed, each pause deliberate. But slowly, layers of resentment and misunderstanding began to unravel. I learned that Ethan had faced his own battles, though of a different kind. His successes were no longer a comparison, but a parallel, two brothers navigating life's expectations in divergent ways. And yet, amidst the cautious civility, a subtle tension lingered. Julian remained outside the cafe, watching, and I felt a pang of guilt mixed with possessiveness. Ethan was my family, but Julian was something else entirely, something I had never dared admit in the presence of anyone but him. Days turned into weeks, and the dynamic between us shifted subtly. My relationship with Julian grew more open, our love no longer hidden in stolen moments, but displayed in small gestures, the brushing of a hand, a lingering kiss in an empty hallway, whispered confessions at dawn. And with every moment, I realized that the boy I had left behind had become a man who deserved not only my respect but my love in every sense of the word. Business challenges, however, soon tested our equilibrium. One evening, as Julian and I reviewed documents in my high-rise office, I received a call that rattled me to my core. A rival company had launched a hostile takeover attempt on one of my key investments, a move that could undo years of careful planning and risked exposing my vulnerabilities to the public. I felt the familiar adrenaline surge, the pulse of power and fear mingling inside me. But this time, it wasn't just about the business, it was about proving to myself, and to the world, that I could protect not only my empire but the people I cared about. Julian, standing close behind me, hand resting lightly on my back, was a reminder that strength wasn't measured allanite, was measured by the courage to share burdens and victories alike. We spent nights strategizing, plotting, and negotiating, our proximity fueling both tension and intimacy. Julian's presence became a stabilizing force, his insights sharp, his loyalty unwavering. I realized then that love, in its most potent form, could coexist with ambition. It didn't weaken you. It enhanced every choice, every decision, every step forward. Amidst the chaos, I received another unexpected visitor, Mom. She arrived at my office unannounced, her expression a mixture of awe and tentative pride. She called me boss again, formally, and for the first time, I saw genuine recognition in her eyes, untainted by the old favoritism. "You've really made something of yourself," she said softly. I nodded, swallowing the rush of emotions that threatened to spill over. "Yes, but the person who helped me through it all is right here." I gestured toward Julian, who had quietly stepped into the office. Mom's gaze flickered between us, her understanding dawning slowly. It wasn't what she had expected, and yet, she didn't recoil. Perhaps she recognized that this version of her son was stronger, complete, and finally unafraid to claim both love and power. Julian and I celebrated our first anniversary quietly, away from the scrutiny of family and the media. A small cabin upstate, surrounded by endless forest and the golden hues of fall, became our sanctuary. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to be vulnerable, not just with Julian, but with life itself. We laughed, cooked, and held each other through cold nights, the world reduced to the warmth of our connection. Ethan reached out again, this time not as a rival or a shadow of the past, but as a brother seeking reconciliation. We met at a local park, the city skyline distant but visible, a reminder of how far we had both come. He extended his hand, and I shook it, feeling the old resentment dissolve with each word spoken honestly. "I'm sorry for how I treated you," he admitted. I didn't realize how blind I was. I smiled faintly, the years of pain softening. It's in the past. We've both grown. That's what matters. Through it all, Julian remained my constant, my anchor. Every victory, every setback, every reunion with the family was colored by his presence, his unwavering love, and the quiet understanding that life was richer with him by my side. As my company flourished and my influence grew, I realized that the true measure of success wasn't wealth or recognition, it was connection, intimacy, and the courage to embrace love without shame or fear. Julian had shown me that. My family had learned that too eventually, though perhaps in their own delayed, imperfect way. And in the quiet moments, when the city below hummed with life and we stood on the balcony of my high-rise apartment, hand in hand, I felt the truth of it. We had survived neglect, favoritism, societal expectations, and our own fears. And yet, here we were, together, undefeated, and undeniably in love. Julian leaned his head against my shoulder, whispering, "We did it, all of it, together." I pressed a kiss to his hair, smiling as the city stretched endlessly beneath us. Yes, together. The world outside might never fully understand our journey, the twin rivalry, the rejection, the climb to power, but it didn't matter. We understood each other. And in the end, that was enough. Every morning, I woke up not just as the boss my family finally acknowledged, but as the man who had reclaimed his life, his dignity, and his heart. And every night, I fell asleep with Julian at my side, the world fading away, leaving only the warmth of our love and the promise of tomorrow. It was the kind of night that demanded reflection, and I found myself thinking about the journey that had brought me here, the boy who had walked away from a family that favored his twin, the man who had clawed his way to power, and the love that had quietly transformed everything. Julian was beside me, hands warm around mine, his presence a tether to reality and sanity in a world that had often felt harsh and unforgiving. "You ever think about how far we've come?" he asked softly, eyes reflecting the twinkle of the city lights. "All the time," I admitted. "It's surreal, but worth every struggle, every sleepless night, every awkward encounter with Ethan and Mom." I chuckled, squeezing his hand. "Even the ones that made me want to throw my phone out the window." He laughed, that low, intimate sound that always made my chest tighten. And yet here we are, still standing. Our lives had intertwined in ways I had never imagined. Business negotiations, high-stakes decisions, and public recognition were all part of my reality now, but so was love. Real, undeniable, enduring love. Julian had become not just my partner, but my compass, my anchor in storms that were inevitable in both life and business. Ethan had grown into a man I could respect, though the shadows of our past still lingered. Reconciliation had been awkward at times, but genuine. The subtle competition that had once defined our childhood had transformed into mutual support, a recognition of shared blood and divergent paths. I realized that forgiving him and forgiving myself for years of bitterness was as liberating as any business victory. The pinnacle moment came during a board meeting that could have ended my largest investment deal. A rival firm attempted to undermine our position with whispers, rumors, and underhanded tactics. Yet, as I stood before the room, I felt no fear. My eyes swept across the board members, Julian's quiet presence at the back of the room fueling my confidence. I presented every argument, every counterpoint, every strategy with precision, clarity, and calm authority. By the end, the rival firm had no choice but to back down. The deal was mine. The room erupted in applause, colleagues acknowledging not just the victory, but the presence of a man who had fought for every inch of success. I allowed myself a brief smile, knowing that the real triumph wasn't the deal, it was the journey, the people who had stood by me, and the love that had anchored me through it all. After the meeting, Julian and I walked the streets of Manhattan under the soft glow of streetlights. Snow began to fall, dusting our shoulders and hair with delicate flakes. He stopped, pulling me close, and whispered, "This, all of this, it's incredible. But what I love most is us." I cupped his face, feeling the warmth of his skin, the steady pulse beneath my fingers. "Us is the most important part," I said, voice husky with emotion. "Everything else is just background noise." That night, in the quiet of my apartment, we celebrated our victories and dreams. Candlelight flickered across our faces as we cooked together, laughing at burnt edges and shared memories of awkward, youthful mistakes. The city hummed below, alive and unaware of the quiet joy unfolding above. The following weeks were a testament to balance: work, love, and family. I hosted a small gathering at my apartment, inviting Ethan and Mom, Julian by my side. It was the first time our family had seen me not as the forgotten twin, but as a man complete in his own right. There was nervous energy, awkward glances, tentative conversations, but also genuine warmth. Julian and I were accepted, not just tolerated. Ethan, slightly embarrassed yet sincere, extended his hand. "I'm proud of you," he said, and in those words, years of resentment melted away. It wasn't just acknowledgement of success, it was acknowledgement of growth, of love, and of the bond we could still share. Winter faded into spring, and with it came new beginnings. Julian and I traveled together, sometimes for work, sometimes for pleasure, discovering hidden corners of the country, from quiet beaches in California to bustling markets in Chicago. Each trip strengthened our connection, our ability to communicate without words, to anticipate each other's needs, and to simply exist in a shared rhythm. The pinnacle of our story arrived unexpectedly, on a mild spring evening, atop a rooftop terrace overlooking the city. Julian had been quieter than usual, a contemplative expression softening his sharp features. I noticed immediately, heart tightening. He turned to me, eyes glinting in the fading sunlight. "Do you remember that first night we met? Outside the boutique?" I smiled, recalling the serendipitous collision of fingers, the laugh that had left my chest aching with unnameable emotion. "I do. How could I forget?" He stepped closer, hands finding mine effortlessly. "I want to make sure that we never have to face life alone again. No matter the challenges, no matter the past, no matter anything. Will you stay with me?" The question, though softly spoken, carried the weight of every struggle, every victory, every stolen moment of intimacy and understanding. My heart pounded, tears threatening to fall, because I realized then that love was not just a refuge, it was a choice, an unbreakable promise. "Yes," I whispered, pulling him close. "Always." That night, the city stretched infinitely below, lights flickering like distant stars. We embraced, bodies and souls entwined, the weight of the past lifted entirely by the certainty of the present. All the pain, all the neglect, all the struggles that had defined my youth were dwarfed by the love I now held, a love earned through resilience, honesty, and unwavering faith in one another. We spent the evening on that rooftop, hands clasped, foreheads touching, whispering dreams of the future. There were no grand speeches, no public declarations, just the quiet intimacy of two men who had found each other against impossible odds. In the weeks that followed, Julian moved in permanently. Our home became a sanctuary of warmth, laughter, and shared ambition. Business continued to thrive, but life had taken on a richer, more profound meaning. Success was no longer measured solely by wealth or recognition, but by the depth of connection, the courage to love openly, and the unwavering commitment to one another. Mom and Ethan remained part of the picture, learning to navigate the new dynamics with grace. There were occasional awkward moments, but also breakthroughs, shared dinners, small jokes, and genuine conversations that bridged years of silence and misunderstanding. I realized that reconciliation didn't erase the past, but it allowed us to move forward with compassion, understanding, and love. On a quiet Sunday morning, as Julian and I sipped coffee on our terrace, I looked out over the city, snow-dusted from a late spring storm, and felt the magnitude of our journey. I had walked away from a family that favored someone else, endured years of struggle and solitude, and emerged not only as a successful businessman but as a man fully capable of love and intimacy. Julian squeezed my hand, eyes glinting with affection and mischief. "You're still full of surprises," he teased, though there was warmth beneath the jest. "I learned from the best," I replied, pulling him close. And in that embrace, the city below sparkling and alive, I understood something fundamental. Life's true victories were not in titles or accolades, but in the courage to claim love, to forgive, and to build a life unafraid of being truly seen. Years from that day, we would look back and remember the boy who walked away, the man who fought, and the love that endured. And every time, we would smile, knowing that the story wasn't just about success or reconciliation, it was about finding home in each other. The world outside might still judge, still underestimate, still prefer the familiar over the unconventional. But Julian and I had already won in ways that mattered most. Hearts aligned, lives intertwined, and a love that refused to be denied. As the sun rose over the skyline, casting golden light across our faces, I whispered to Julian, "We did it. We really did it." He smiled, forehead resting against mine, and the answer was in his eyes. Yes, together always. And so, against a backdrop of a city that never slept, we built a life unshakable by neglect, unbroken by doubt, and overflowing with love. The boy who had walked away from favoritism had returned as a man who had everything: power, respect, and the most precious gift of all, a heart that was finally, completely home. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.